Today, I'm joined by Kevin Cassar, who's the Chief Data and AI Officer at TalkTalk. Hi, Kevin. How are you doing this afternoon?
Hello, Rebecca. I'm very, very well. Thank you for asking.
You've led data and AI functions across telecoms, insurance, and financial regulation. What would you say is the biggest cultural misunderstanding leaders still have about why AI value doesn't materialize at the pace they expect?
There are different parts to this part. If we talk about the culture part, I think the concept about AI, treating AI and data products similar like any other different business functions. So when you look at the chief operating officer, for example, he or she will get criteria about how he or she are going to improve operational efficiency. What are the cost savings to operations that they are going to deliver? How are they going to improve customer satisfaction? So all these criteria are aligned to the business needs, ultimately to the value of the business. Sometimes, not always, when we talk about data, we talk, can you build up this dashboard? Can you build up this model? You see where this is going. So what are the value? Why do we care? So that mentality about the misalignment between the tech developments versus the business needs does play a key factor. And the way that we treat the data teams and the CDAO all the way downwards might be a bit different than the way that we treat some of the traditional C-suite functions. So that's the first one. How do you interact with the data teams to make sure that you are aligned to enable the business needs? So that's the first one. The first one from a culture perspective is the investment in the data teams. So sometimes some industry more than others might have not invested as much as they needed to in the tech development both from a product, people and processes perspective. And with the pace at which we are evolving in the industry, with the accelerated pace that thanks to Gen AI and agentic AI, etc., that investment discrepancy between the needs and the spend is coming up to the surface more. So how can you ensure that you keep your people upskilled to continue to service the needs of the organization, but equally well, how do you ensure that you've got the right tools, process, and people to do that? So the third part is relating to scaling up. So there are some challenges when, and this ties up to the value as well, that most organizations, when it comes to delivering value, they live in POC world. And they don't think beyond how can I deliver a data product versus a data model. So the way that I define those two for simplicity, a data product is, as it says on the tin, so a data model, a dashboard, etc., a data asset that is used by the business in production. So the mindset is completely different. So that scaling up and moving past beyond POC is another culture aspect. There are others, but two are talking about maybe the attitude to the data. Data is an asset that belongs to everyone, so we need to collaboratively own the data. Business as well as data teams need to be the data owners and data stewards. And how can we collaboratively look after this asset? If you have a real estate, everyone understands I need to keep the maintenance of the real estate, otherwise it starts to degrade. Similar with the data, how can we collectively, not just data teams, but as an organization, have that culture that the data assets belongs to the organization, and we need to collectively look after the data, make sure it's well maintained, good quality, not siloed, etc. Those are some of the key features which, having worked at different organization, made the difference or otherwise.
And so you talked about, these are some of the facets here, and you talked about the gap between the rate of AI adoption and the rate of the business value delivery. To you, what do you think are the early warning signs that an organization is scaling uses rather than the outcome?
But the first one is the ownership. So when you look at people and you ask, okay, we are developing these data products, who's the Exco or Exco -1 sponsor? If you start to see that all the time it's the CDAO only on their own, then you start to follow with the question, okay, do you have a clear view of why do we care? What is the business going to use this? So most of the time in my life, we had co-ownership. So although it's the data team that are responsible to deliver the data products, but the data teams needs to work very closely with the business needs, including them in the end of sprint cycle, etc. So we talk about the operating model and might talk about the Data and AI Summit. So how can we include also the business along the process to make sure that ultimately they are using the data product. So how can we include this early adoption? So the first one is early indicators. If they see CDIO or CTO or just the data team are owning the data products on their own and there's no clear alignment, why do we care? Typically, not always. That might be a sign of you are scaling up a lot of POCs rather than data products. The second one, which I look at, I joined TalkTalk a couple of months ago, so I lived this very recently. What is the maturity of your MLOps and LLMOps capability? So those are your capabilities that can help you to scale up from POC to production, especially when we start to look about agentic AI, the scaling up architectural challenges start to come into life. So what is the maturity of your MLOps and LLMOps? And that can give you an understanding of where they are on the scale. Are they equipped to scale up their POCs into production, or is there hurdle where that will prohibit them? I mentioned three. So ownership. The second one is a conversation about why do we care and the value that the products are driving, and the maturity of the MLOps/LLMOps capabilities.
So these are some of the warning signs that you've identified there. But how about for things that organizations should stop doing immediately? So these are the things they need to identify. What's something they should double down on to accelerate value delivery?
Yeah, so the double down is really push hard. I know that at the start, and I experienced this in an organization, that getting that value from the data products. Why do we care? How can we measure the value from an organization perspective? So what are the priorities at XCOM level? What is it that we want to change, influence, modify, or improve? And how will the data products line up to those priorities? And equally, how can we quantify the difference? That conversation sounds easy. It starts to become a bit more challenging when you have it in reality. When you add to that dynamic as to the speed to value, and that also starts to add another dynamic. So the first one is that organization need to definitely double down as to why do we care? What are we going to get out of this? So that's definitely needs to happen. Again, it's not an easy answer, but it's one that needs to be had. The second part about focusing on the foundations. We talk about AI readiness and assessing AI readiness quite extensively in the organization. So how do you start to provide your people with the right skills, which we discuss? How do you enable that collaborative culture? So this is not just a problem that belongs to the data team. This is an organization-wide. We need to work on it collaboratively. Operating model, which I touched upon. How do you make sure that you've got the federated operating model or the other operating model that you want to put in place? How do you make sure the governance is in place, and how do you use governance as an enabler rather than a hindrance? I talked about MLOps, and that falls under the tech and data category. And equally well, how do you align to the business model? So get the foundations right, and that will then help you to accelerate. So those two, start to ask why, and why do we care, and get the foundations right. And in terms of what stop doing, I think there were two parts of the question. What I will encourage organization is stop chasing shiny products. It's very easy to fall into the trap. Oh yeah, that's a really great tool. My competitors have got X, Y, and Z, and I've got A, B, and C. So do I. Why do you care? Why do you need products? What values are you going to deliver? So changing the mindset. It's very easy to fall into that trap. And there's a lot of vendors, really good vendors out there, a lot of technology. But stop chasing shiny products and focus on why do we care? What's the that value deliverable, and what are we going to do with these products?
And that's a really great focus for people to really get into the definition of like why, as you say, why do you care? What is it you're willing to, or wanting to achieve, and how do we go from there? Having these strong foundations. And what I find really impressive about you, Kevin, is the fact that you've built award-winning data teams by upskilling and empowering people, which is, a lot of the time is the people behind the kind of technology that we need to really champion them and make sure they're capable and they're well informed about what a really good data team looks like. And so from that perspective, what does an AI-ready culture look like at the individual contributor level, not just at the leadership level?
And you said I was lucky. Partly that's because of the organizations I worked with. So when I was at the Financial Conduct Authority, for example, we had data set that covered the whole financial industry in the UK. And that's an exciting part of itself. And that attracted really high talented people to work on those business problems that they had. And that gave me the opportunity to experience what do high award-winning, multidisciplinary as well teams look like. And if I had to summarize down to come to your question as to what are the characteristics of a high performing award-winning teams, if I had to summarize it down, it would be 4 things from what I experienced at different organizations. The first one is insatiable thirst to knowledge. Their appetite and willingness to learn was phenomenal. Most of the people came from doctor degree. I'm not saying that you need to have a doctor degree, but even so, they just wanted to keep learning, reading, experimenting, knowing that it was just like very remarkable and commendable. So, thirst for knowledge. The second one is can-do attitude. Irrespective of how complex the problem was, the teams never gave up. They still kept trying. They failed many times, but that resiliency is, let's try something else. That didn't work. We learned a lot. Let's try something different. So that can-do attitude was the second part. Autonomy. So they had a remit to experiment and test, and they were empowered. That's why they were very knowledgeable. That's why they were smart people. They had the autonomy to try things. It was aligned to the value. So don't get me wrong. I know that might sound a bit controversial. So that was the end state. Why do we need to do stuff was always present. But they had to autonomy to experiment, try, test, fail, adopt, learn. And ultimately, we trusted them to do the right thing. So that's the autonomy is the third part. And the fourth part is something which I mentioned already, the multi-skilled cross collaboration. So data teams on their own, they need the support of others. So you need the data engineers, the platform engineers, you need the business to guide you to understand why do we care, what do we need to do, how do you want to output. Governance and risk management plays an important part, architecture, etc. The list keeps going on. But data teams never worked in isolation. So high performance and high achieving teams always had the mental that they are a team, not just data scientists, but they are a multi-skilled team. So those are the 4 things from an individual perspective, from collaboration. To summarize: thirst for knowledge, can-do attitude, autonomy, and multi-skilled cross collaboration.
So you touched a little bit there on governments and that kind of the sense of it's all working together. There are all these components working together. But we've seen recently that governance and ethics in particular are often seen as barriers to speed. And you take the opposite view that they actually accelerate value. But what does governance that enable delivery look like in practice?
People look at me when I say that governance is neighbor rather than a hindrance. And most of the times I get the initial shock. Ultimately, it's a trade-off between the risks and the rewards that we need to do. That's a concept very well understood outside the data world. It's a concept that applies to us. There's no one perfect solution. So there's always trade-offs that need to be made, especially when it comes to using with data. I worked in the health industry with personal information. So health-related personal information industry that starts to escalate information at a different level from a governance perspective. Trade secrets. So sometimes when you work at financial regulators, you work with very sensitive data at initial level. So the way that you treat the data needs to be a bit more careful. So working with data governance and the wider governance, colleagues, DPO, AI, risk governance, etc., helped us to identify at the start what are the risks that we need to be aware of. There were times when projects were a no-go, and we had to know upfront instead of investing time and dealing with the challenges. We needed to know upfront this is a no-go because of X, Y, and Z. Or else these are the risks that we need to be aware of. How can we mitigate them, address them, and then move on? Identifying those risks upfront was a really good enabler for us to spend resources and time and effort to deliver the value, rather than starting down a path and then having to either track back, change tack, or stop completely. So that's what I mean by governance enabler, and help us to identify what are the risks, how can we mitigate, address the risks, and if unfortunate situation where we can't start, at least that helped us to stop exposing the organization to risk and wasting valuable resources.
CEOs and board leaders, what do you think is the most important mindset shift they need to make if they want AI to actually deliver return on investment in 2026?
The mind shift is the first one, as I mentioned. We are living in a very fast-paced environment. That's the environment that we live in. There's macroeconomics drivers that are pushing that. So stay grounded. So what is your true mission? What is your plan? I'm not saying don't be flexible. If you don't include flexibility, you perish as well. But stay grounded. Don't get carried away by the hype. What is your true mission? What is it that you want to deliver? So that's the first one. The second one is, as a leader, I need to deliver through others. So how can I empower the people to give them a psychological safe environment, give them the skills, the clarity, and then trust them to deliver the right thing. And the third part, the change in mindset is how can I bring the business leaders on me on this journey. That change in mindset that I'm delivering data products and then that's it, I'm done. I think we are seeing that change in mindset that we are collaboratively as a C-suite people. We need to work together to deliver the value to our stakeholders, whoever they may be. So those are the three things: stay grounded, empower your people and invest in them, and work adapting that collaborative mindset to work with business rather than here's a data product and here's the next one.
Collaboration is what we're all about here, and we love sharing knowledge on Techerati. And that leads me on nicely that you'll actually be at Tech Show London in March. Would you want to share anything about your session?
So I'm going to touch upon some of these concepts in more detail. So I decided to talk about the culture and operating model aspect rather than talking the traditional technical route, because I truly believe that by changing the mindset, adopting a more adaptive mindset and touching on some of the things which I mentioned in here will really help to deliver that speed to value. So we are working in an environment where it's not just the return on investment, but the speed to unlock that return on investment is also coming important. When you add that speed to delivery to the return on investment, it starts to change the dynamic. So how can we look into the levers that we can use beyond the technology? And there are some good values in there which can help others as well to deliver at pace.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Kevin, today. I've learned a lot about the organization and how you approach data and AI safely.
So thank you for your time, Rebecca, and I look forward to see you in March.